My name is Paul Saffo. I am a Silicon Valley-based technology forecaster, and I teach at Stanford.
Wonderful. Can you speak first a little to the impact that the high-tech companies in Silicon Valley have had on the world? How have they shaped the world as we know it today?
Well, the better part of the last 50 years really has been shaped by the advent of digital technology. And Silicon Valley historically has been ground zero for that. And so we've gotten the reputation of constantly coming out with new surprises and things. Of course, Silicon Valley has now changed. The way I think of it is we're not unique, but we are an important node on a global silicon network.
And how do you see high tech shaping the world in the future, let's say in the next 20, 50 to 100 years?
At the moment, the main technology shaping our lives is digital technology. And quite simply put, digital technology, telecommunications, computing is the solvent leaching the glue out of our institutions and changing our relationships and changing the sense of distance. So that gets our attention. But if you're looking out 50 or 100 years, we'll look back and say, well, actually, after about 2020, digital was not the most important technology. That the more important technology that's just building today are the new sciences of the very small. So life sciences, genetics, genomics. The impact that life sciences will have and the genomics revolution on our lives over the next 20 years will make the impact of digital technology look pretty trivial. And then after that, so, about 2050 and beyond, the next wave is the sciences of the very small, nanotechnology and precise molecular control of manufacturing and beyond. So this century is going to be quite a ride.
And what kind of changes do you mean in the next 20 and then 50 years? Like, are we talking about designer babies? Are we talking about the eradication of disease and deformities and all kinds of issues biologically?
It was Emerson, our famous American philosopher, once said that humankind is a mutable cloud. And what we're going to do is change the very nature of what it means to be human. I think around 2080, 2090, people will be asking questions like, what was human once upon a time? But lots is going on. So changing the human organism, and I should add that we've changed the human organism before, that first we invent our technologies and then we turn around and we use our technologies to reinvent ourselves as individuals, as communities, as societies. And if you think of some of the amazing events that happened in Italy, 1401, Aldous publishing the first modern book at the Aldine Press, that literacy in books utterly changed what it meant to be human. And so this is the latest chapter in a long history.
So are we going to be merging with technology? Are we going to be giving ourselves like superpowers so we can fly and
Well, we've already given ourselves superpowers. Think of personal computers. Think of something as simple as eyeglasses and telescopes and spacecraft. And we've merged with our technology all along. Now that relationship will become ever more intimate. And the interesting question to ask is, are we actually in the early stages of building the precursors to non-biological life? Will the evolution of our species in the next century or so take another form where we hand it off to evolving machines?
So you're talking about the singularity?
Well, the idea of the singularity is an intriguing one, and I'm very close friends with Ray Kurzweil, who popularized the idea. It was first proposed by a science fiction writer. Um, you know, I think we singularities happen every day. And that idea of the big singularity where machines become as intelligent as we are, but most importantly, if they became as intelligent as we are, they will only be as intelligent as we are for a very short period of time, because then they'll evolve beyond us in ways that so quickly that we won't even recognize them. Now, if that should happen, I have a forecast. If we have super intelligent machines, and this was a MIT professor who made this observation. The observation is not mine. His name is Hans Moravec, and he said, "Well, if we're very, very lucky and we get super intelligent machines, if we're very lucky, they will treat us like pets." And I don't know about you, but I wouldn't mind having the life of my dog. However, if we're very, very unlucky, they will treat us like food. So
Yikes.
yeah, so we're in for a lot of surprises. And then also it's important to keep in mind that innovation begets innovation, and the cross impact of all the technological innovations in our lives are what is causing this deep change. The human genome was decoded because researchers had the computer tools in the form of computation and also manipulating robots to actually do the work for us. Computers and robots were the personal bulldozers of genetics pioneers. And now what we're seeing is the next wave of technology. We're going into space. Just recently, it seems like all the billionaires want to go into space. There's a lot of controversy about it, but in the case of Jeff Bezos, I can think of no higher use for his wealth and his innovative creativity than to help us as humankind become a spacefaring civilization. However, the question is, will humans really go into deep space? We'll go into orbital space, and we may eventually have colonies at the Lagrange points in 100 years or so, as the famous Professor Gerard O'Neill at Princeton proposed. The question is deep space. And maybe that's where the non-biological successors to human life go into deep space as our proxies. And I don't know about you, I just hope they send pictures back.
Well, let's talk about techno-libertarianism as a concept and its relevance to Silicon Valley. Like we talked about, robots taking over the world, and we've had that idea for decades now. And it's like humans have this self-destructive tendency because we're spiraling towards that possible future. And it's like we just can't help ourselves because we're just so driven to explore and advance at perhaps the cost of all else, including our own survival. So what is the relevance of this ideology and the kind of any resistance to like government regulations of any sorts or any
Yes.
control?
It's a very provocative observation that you've just made. And I think the important thing is to separate the ideology from the technology. That what we tend to do whenever a new technology comes along is we invest it with either our deepest hopes, it'll lead us to some utopian future, or we invest it with our deepest fears that, oh my God, this is the end of civilization and we may still wipe ourselves out, make no mistake. But the expectations we have around that become an ideology and occasionally becomes a religion. And so techno-libertarianism is, in my opinion, actually a secular religion. Libertarianism itself is a very peculiar belief system, very common in Silicon Valley. My personal bias is that anybody who is a libertarian really doesn't know what's going on around them. So you see these rugged individualists who say, get out of my way and let me be free and do as I please. Well, they're driving cars on highways that were paid for by everybody's taxes. And the economic climate that made Silicon Valley possible was the direct result of government policies and engagements, and you can go down the list. So these are people who choose to be blind to relationships. Who knows? Is it a positive religion or a destructive religion? Well, too soon to tell. I think we're all a little worried about religions in general. You know, 20 years ago, everybody was worried about the Y2K bug in their computers. And what they missed was that there was a second Y2K bug, and that was in our culture, that the so-called sky gods of the Middle East, the so-called sky god religions of the Middle East, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, all have this belief of the big guy up in heaven controlling things, and built into it was this eschatological expectation that it would all end someday. And when that intersected with computers in the year 2000, there were a whole lot of people who really believed the world was going to end. And the danger was they would make it a self-fulfilling prophecy. And some tried. What Osama bin Laden did on 9/11 and Islamic fundamentalism is just a form of millennial belief, no different than what Christian fundamentalists believe. And so the danger with techno-libertarianism is they're going to allow their expectations to be reality, and that would be a very bad thing.
So androids, we hear a lot about androids, you know, again, often depicted in like sci-fi stories. When are we going to have androids, you know, be part of society? I thought we'd have robots to serve us by now. And where is this going to go? Are we going to end up like marrying androids because, you know, they'll be like the perfect human. They'll never argue back and do everything, you know, the way we want it. So what do you think of that concept and where it's going to go?
Well, it's interesting. In a class I teach at Stanford titled Foresight for Innovators, that every year there's a central question we focus on in the class. And about 7 years ago, the question I posed to the students was, what year would someone sue for the right to marry their robot? And the first reaction of students was, well, that was ridiculous. But, you know, we'll think about it. And then by the middle of the term, they were saying, well, yeah, you know, that's not so ridiculous. And by the end of the term, they were convinced it already happened and we just didn't know about it yet. And as it does happen, that you go to Japan and there have been otaku, which is the Japanese word for nerd, but it's a much more literary term, that there are shy otaku who actually treat these very primitive robotic things as their girlfriends. And I say girlfriends because this does seem to be mostly guys having relationships with robots, not women. And I think that's because it's going to be a lot longer in time for a robot sophisticated enough to be a woman's companion than for a guy. Apologies to the men out there, but I think it's a bit. More generally about this is, when will we actually get those robots? So, you know, it's a standing joke in Silicon Valley that, you know, you finish a project, you get to the point of being 90% finished, and you only need another 90% of effort to get to the final 10%. And then when you get to 90% of that, you just need another 90%. So it's an asymptotic approach to having robots that are, you know, like what we saw in, you know, Metropolis or the other movies. What will happen, the bigger revolution, well, let me back up. If you look at the field of artificial intelligence, there are two very distinct types of artificial intelligence. There's so-called narrow AI, which is expert systems and the like. And then there's AGI, artificial general intelligence. That's building the device that is actually, you know, indistinguishable from human intelligence. AGI has been changing our lives for decades already. That you cannot make a single move in society or touch a device or look anything up without touching a narrow AI. We are all a little bit like Blanche Dubois in the famous novel A Streetcar Named Desire, where she says, "I have always relied upon the kindness of strangers." Well, in this case, the strangers we're relying on are these anonymous narrow AIs who are doing all sorts of things to make our lives more convenient, and also probably screwing it up too, but that's another story. So while we're waiting for artificial intelligence is intelligent enough to make clerics nervous, AI really is changing our lives.
As a futurist, can you pretty much predict everything that's going to happen based on the technology that we have now and where it could go and likely will go? Or do you think it's possible that something will come out of left field that no one's even thinking about right now?
Well, I don't predict anything. The job of a futurist is, as I think of it, is my job is to map a cone of uncertainty. Say what is possible over time. And so I judge my work not whether I'm right or not on the specific outcome. Sometimes I get lucky, but whether the outcome fell within the range of uncertainty that I forecast. And it's not just that prediction is hard, it's logically impossible. Prediction would be possible only in a world that a fundamentalist religious person would believe. It's a world where God has a plan. He or she has got it all written out. But why even look at the plan if you could, because you can't change anything? All the evidence I have is we live in a world where our actions in the present affect the outcomes in the future. And so the way I view forecasting, in a way, what I am is a historian of technology who spends most of his time looking at technologies that don't exist yet. Everything has an antecedent. The foundation for being a good forecaster is to thoroughly understand history, not take it literally, but look at the patterns of history and see how that flows into the future. But the whole point of forecasting is to understand what is possible in order to affect the outcome.
Okay, wonderful.
One build on that, I realize jokes translate terribly across cultures, but the one that you will often hear in the United States is there's two hikers, or hunters out in the woods, and they're getting chased by a bear. And one guy stops to tighten his shoelaces and put on his running shoes. And the other one, his partner, looks at him and says, "Well, how come you're doing that? You can't outrun a bear." And he says, "I only got to outrun you."
That's great. I
So,
think that one will translate.
yeah, so foresight is about learning how to run better, how to anticipate what's ahead and take actions in the present that help push things towards a preferred future.
Perfect. Thank you so much. This was wonderful.
Don't miss this edition of Speak Up to find out more.